I am Patsy Petrie, and this is Community Planning Conversations. Today I've invited two members of the local chapter of the Prairie Group of the Sierra Club to join me in talking about environmental issues. To my immediate left is Peg Flynn, and at the end of the row there is Kirsten Replogle. Kirsten Replogle. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Thank you for joining me today. Before we talk a lot about what the Sierra Club is focusing on these days, I'd like to talk about both of you a little bit and how you got involved and your interest in environmental issues. Peg, why don't you start?
Sure. Well, I'm a freelance French to English translator. I'm self-employed, and I've been interested in environmental issues for many years, but it was really only once I became a freelancer and had more flexibility in my schedule that I was able to start volunteering with the Sierra Club locally. And I've been doing that for about 3 years. As an undergraduate, I did an internship out west with a land use group, so it was a natural fit that I should kind of return to that here in Champaign-Urbana. So it's been a...
And your role in the club?
Right now I'm acting as chair, and I also edit the newsletter that comes out on a quarterly basis. I hasten to add that we do pretty much work by consensus. There isn't a lot of voting that goes on, and to call yourself chair is something, it sounds like more than you really end up doing, because we do function very democratically, and it's set up that way so that no one person can really control the agenda completely, but I am the person who keeps the group focused on what we need to be doing and thinking about. So,
is that unusual for a group to function in the consensus format rather than voting format?
I don't think it's terribly unusual. You've been involved in more groups than I have with Sierra Club. I think that that's pretty typical for Sierra Club groups.
It is for the Sierra Club to work on a consensus basis.
Well, that's a nice lead-in to Kirsten. You've been involved a long time, Peg said.
Yeah, I joined the Sierra Club back in 1992 and became active immediately. I was, a few years out of college and looking for something to contribute to in my community, and went to a meeting locally and met some wonderful people, and they had opportunities for me to get involved right away, and so I sort of I call it the Sierra Club vortex. You get involved and you just...
It just pulls you right in.
Pulls you right in. And so I've been involved at both the group and chapter and national levels ever since then.
And do you come with an environmental background, or are you unique as Peg is with her very esoteric background?
Well, I work at the university in a molecular neurobiology lab. But, I grew up camping and, turning over rocks and digging in this and that all that kind of stuff, being outdoors. And so investigating the environment and being, paying attention to the environment has been part of me since I was little.
So in this consensus-driven group, how large is it, and what is your role in it?
Right now I'm the secretary of the group, and I also serve as the membership chair, which sort of keeps track of, where we're gaining and losing members, and I have a roster of the people who are members of the Sierra Club that are within our demographic group. And there's about 6 to 8 of us that do the core work, producing the newsletter, putting on the monthly meetings, trying to tackle an occasional campaign here and there with the energy that we have.
And for those who are watching this program, how can they find out information about the local club? Is there a website, or do they go to the national website and then work through the state and then to the community?
I think the way to get to our website more quickly is to go to illinois.sierraclub.org/prairie.
Okay.
So, or they can just go to the Illinois chapter site, and there's a map there that you can select your area, and it'll take you to your group's website. So, yeah, most people will join Sierra Club not really knowing or not being too aware that there are opportunities for local activism. They think of it primarily as a national entity, which it is certainly, but so when people join, I don't know how often people say, well, I want to be doing Sierra Club things locally. I mean, I did that, but I don't know how many other people do. Some people are even quite surprised when we tell them, hey, there's a lot you can do here. It's not all, out west, it's not all public lands. There's a lot of ways in which Sierra Club is very relevant here, so.
The national level brand is very strong with Sierra Club.
Yes.
So since
Uh-oh.
we just lost the identity of the local pay channel,
Oh, dear.
we must identify that again. It's Channel 6. Let's talk first about what you all have been doing on the local level, since that doesn't get a lot of visibility. I know that at earlier times that the local group was very involved in some planning issues.
Yes, since I've been involved, I would say that both nationally and locally, there's been more of an emphasis on planning sprawl issues. And what drew me in fact, was a workshop, a 2-day workshop that the Prairie Group put on for the community. It wasn't just for Sierra Club members, and that was all about learning about smart growth, touring Champaign-Urbana by bus and seeing how to do smart growth and how not to do it, that kind of thing. Since then, we've had a number of speakers that have directly or indirectly spoken about planning issues, and nationally it is, I would say that that's one of their big policy priorities is, smart growth type planning overall.
And what, as the group, what did you see as the result of this workshop that you all sponsored for the community? Were you able to track any positive results?
Well,
Did we get a growth boundary?
I think that the goals of it were primarily educational and also to raise the profile of the Prairie Group here, which it did locally. And it also was intended to show people how to be activists, just basic grassroots organizing, implementing strategies, nuts and bolts kinds of things. So those are all things that people may not have known how to do before, and they know how to do it now. For myself, that workshop is what got me involved in the Prairie Group. So I can at least point to that and say that it was important for me. What else would you say it did for the group?
The entire community planning process can be very confusing. And so one of the things that I took away from that was a better understanding of actually what happens in that planning process and how citizens can participate within their community and be heard. We had Bruce Knight talk at the workshop that we put on.
And Bruce Knight is Director of Planning in the city
of Champaign.
Right.
Right. And so it sort of demystified a lot of the processes that, you hear about the end result, but you don't know what goes into that.
Right.
And I think it gave us confidence to participate in other local issues like Big Small, and that just by knowing what we were getting into a little bit better and how to carry the Sierra Club message into those sorts of discussions.
Right, and I think that a number of the people who did the workshop went on to also volunteer in Big Small All. It's a good thing to bring up. It had a lot in common with Big Small All. That same sort of visioning process was at work in both activities. So, in a small way, I think that you could say that those very same people who were interested in our workshop are still interested, they're still active, they're still going to activities and, opportunities for public input for local planning.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that next step of going and working and being involved in Big Small All. To what extent was the local group involved in Big Small All? And then you talk about your own involvement. And then we'll talk about some of the results that
Okay.
are beginning to evolve out of Big Small All. And for those who weren't involved in Big Small All, why don't you just briefly describe what that process has been for the county?
Well, was a very large-scale project sponsored by the county and other entities, as I understand, for giving the public a chance to give its input in terms of what it wanted to see for the next 25 years in Champaign County. What do they want Champaign County and the cities in it and other communities in it to look like? And that involved transportation, natural resources, all the different groups that Big Small All was broken down into. It
Did
took-
did the Sierra Club group focus mostly on the environmental and the farmland preservation issues? Or did you focus on some of the others, such as housing and the sprawl and education and health?
I think what most of the Sierra Club members who I know took part in Big Small All, they did tend to gravitate towards natural resources, parks, open space, farmland preservation, for the most part. We never really did a tally of how many people did the Big Small All meetings consistently, went to each one, what they did in each one, but just anecdotally, people did say, oh yeah, I sat in on the natural resources group, and I went to 2 of the meetings early on in the process, and that's pretty much where my interests were too. So yeah, there was a concentration of Sierra Club people in those areas.
Were you involved?
No, I was not involved in the Big Small.
You didn't.
There-
You didn't do that.
There are a couple other people that are active in the group locally that did. So, we sort of delegate some of the
Has
stuff
the
to
group-
people's schedules and
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff.
Has the group talked about the results from this long process that was approximately 18 months and a lot of public
Right.
meetings and then
Right.
larger group meetings and
Mhm.
committee meetings?
There has been no formal discussion
Right.
at any of our meetings that I'm aware of Big Small All. There may have been a little discussion over our listserv. I think there was some concern expressed about some of the objectives being diluted towards the end. But again, I was good about going early on, and I sort of wasn't able to
Mhm.
make the later ones, so I can't speak for them in terms of what really went on at those meetings. But I do recall people, saying they weren't too sure about how strong a position natural resources would have in that process, having gone as far as it has. So
is the group ready to go before the different city councils on some planning issues that are coming forth in our communities?
it's probably a good chance to talk about cool cities.
It probably is.
Do you want me to say what it is? Cool.
If you like.
Okay. Cool Cities is an initiative, it's a nationwide Sierra Club effort to promote smart energy uses by municipalities. And there are other groups working on this in Illinois, and we want to be one of them. We did just have a meeting on planning our Cool Cities campaign. And what made me think of that is that you talked about going before councils and all that sort of thing. Probably the closest thing to that we will be doing is we're going to be trying to speak to local leaders, elected officials, and find out, what they're doing already for encouraging smart energy, and then advocating, all the things that we've heard about locally about, reducing our carbon emissions locally. So that's something that's still very much in the planning stages, I think. You were at the meeting for that. Maybe you could speak more about what you did.
Yeah, a little bit more background on the Cool Cities Initiative. In 2005, the mayor of Seattle, Greg Nichols, on the day that the Kyoto Protocol went into effect, which 141 nations signed on to, and of course the United States did not.
Why don't you just quickly describe the Kyoto?
The Kyoto Protocol is a international treaty to get governments to commit to reducing their carbon dioxide greenhouse gas emissions to 7% below the levels they were emitting in 1990 by the year 2012. So it's to cut those gas emissions by a significant percentage because, of course, they've been growing since 1990. So the challenge that Mayor Nichols issued to mayors all across the United States was to commit locally to that Kyoto benchmark of 7% below the 1990 levels within their municipalities.
Even though we as the United States have not signed it.
Right. It's
Yeah.
the think globally, act locally idea
Right.
in action. And so what came about out of this was a U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement. And since then, which I believe that the initial group of 10 mayors that created this agreement in, I think, about March of 2005, these 10 mayors represented, I don't remember how many people, but since then, we're now at 333 mayors representing 53.5 million people in the United States have committed to this greenhouse gas reduction effort.
Mm-hmm.
And so in addition to cutting the emissions, there's also the mayors are also seeking to get state governments to do the same and urge the federal government to pass legislation on greenhouse gas issues. So it's a big grassroots movement at the elected official level. And so the Sierra Club's Cool Cities campaign is meant to support and encourage mayors and municipalities around the country in doing this sort of project.
And you have suggested ways for us to
There,
go about this?
Right. So the process is, you get your mayor to commit to signing this agreement, and then you end up going to the city councils to ask them to direct the city to come up with an inventory of what the current greenhouse gas emissions are from the municipality, like the city of Urbana, for example, and then calculate how much they need to be reduced to hit that Kyoto benchmark, and then come up with a plan for reaching that benchmark. And so there are all kinds of ways you can do that. The city of Denver is saving $814,000 a year by replacing their street lights or their stop lights with the LED lights rather than the incandescent bulbs. Spirit Lake, Iowa is saving $120,000 a year because they put up 2 wind turbines powering an elementary school. And Antioch Community High School here in Illinois is getting supplemental power from the methane gas that's being emitted from a local landfill, and that's saving them $100,000 a year and reducing or preventing 4,500 tons of greenhouse gases from being emitted into the atmosphere. So there's all kinds of steps that can be taken once you know what your targets are. And at the same time, you can see significant cost savings of taxpayer dollars, which can only make incredibly good financial sense.
I can see the argument between the two communities. Urbana is going to claim Champaign because the winds go west to east.
Well,
increasing the measurement in Urbana.
If the group really does undertake this Cool Cities effort, the hope that we would be
cooperate.
to cooperate between all of the communities here, Urbana, Champaign, Savoy, Bloomington,
St. Joe.
St.
It's
Joe.
regional.
Exactly.
It's a regional plan.
Exactly.
Do you have the figure in that number, the percentage of the population now that's covered by the mayors who have signed on? You did mention a couple of large cities, but I wondered how many of the mega cities have signed on. Chicago.
Chicago has,
Okay.
and I believe New York City has.
Okay, so we do have a model right here in our own state of,
We do,
of a
definitely.
community that has done it. That's excellent. So
Right.
that certainly helps make the argument within our own state that it isn't just happening on either coast, which is
Right.
what we always say.
Right.
Here, they can do it there, but not in the
Not in the middle,
Midwest.
right.
Oh,
Right.
that's excellent.
And I believe some of the ideas in Chicago, and there are a couple of suburbs in the Chicago area also that have signed on to this. Rooftop gardens, getting shuttles to go around some of the restaurant and shopping areas, so people aren't, driving half a mile to go here because you can't walk because it's a 6-lane highway or something.
Right.
Um,
Lack of connectivity, as we
Exactly,
say.
exactly. So there are a lot of very simple things that are being discussed right here in the state of Illinois.
And what about things that we need to be thinking about related? You talked about shuttles, but other forms of our transportation situation here in our own community that adds so much to the greenhouse gases. Is Sierra Club going to come forward with some suggestions on how we might go about improving our transportation? Since it's a key time, we have 3 consultants in the community working on the transportation
Right.
issues.
Right.
This is a good timing for matching these issues up.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are a regional partner with the Center for Neighborhood Technology, Transopoly, those transportation meetings that have been taking place in Champaign-Urbana during October and November that are just now wrapping up.
And they were sponsored by the
MTD.
Right.
Right. So we are sort of formally aligned with that, and we've tried pretty hard to put the word out there, and I've been to a couple of the Transopoly meetings myself, and they're very useful and interesting. As far as what the group would do, we do a lot in terms of public education. I would say that the size of the group and the difficulty that we have in getting manpower limits our ability to advocate more consistently, strongly, forcefully for these very much needed things. We have monthly meetings. We do a lot politically. That's probably where we're strongest. We just had a very good political season with a political forum right here, and we endorsed any number of candidates through the Sierra Club, their procedures for doing that. But we would like very much to get out more and be out front in terms of speaking up about transportation, sprawl, and so on. But it does come down to manpower, and we don't have enough of that here.
That's a very good topic to talk about a little bit more. We've had 4 opportunities within the county for our citizens to participate in public planning process, but the turnout has not been as rewarding as many of the different groups had hoped. So how do we turn the corner on engaging our community a bit more to be concerned about these burning issues that we do have in the community? Loss of farmland is probably one very near and dear to your group. The sprawl is adding to that loss of
Right.
farmland.
That's a really good question, and if you figure out the answer,
Let
would you
us
let us know?
I was testing you all. I'm trying to figure out how to do this for next semester with my class. So I'm asking everybody this question: how are we going to improve the percentage numbers of community members who come to either a charrette or a scenario planning or whatever we're doing in a particular semester? So it's not a test. I'm really looking
You're
for
wonderful.
ideas.
Yeah,
It is.
And we are too.
Yes.
We've had some events that we've hosted, get to know the opportunities nights, and there's been some success with that. It seems like there's a level of complexity to people's lives these days that they don't feel like they can give a large amount of time.
Right.
And I think that's the disconnect, is people don't always realize that it doesn't have to be a large amount of time to still make a difference. And so it's finding ways to get bite-sized pieces of action for people to do that can be done almost at any time, not always going to a meeting on a night when, the kids got band practice or, something.
Right.
But lets them feel like they're contributing. And when you can get people in the habit of doing that, then they're more likely to start making time in their schedule for some of the other more scheduled or rigid events. But it's always a conundrum of how do you find the way to get them the little bits that will draw the vortex.
It's a really hard. Discretionary time and discretionary energy have literally collapsed, and it's very difficult. I have been dropping this idea to get us to start thinking outside the box. It is not my idea, but I presented this conundrum at a conference, and a colleague who happens to be at the University of Arizona, which is in Tucson, and they work with the Indian indigenous population there, and she told me that they have just started holding a lot of these community meetings at the Walmart or like kind that too, and so what she's saying is that we've got to change the way we think about doing this, a macro change, rather than the usual thing that we think about it at a church hall or at a school, elementary school, which are all nice neutral territories. There's no question about that, but hard to get the families to come out.
And then when they can get their shopping done at the same time, it's like, oh yeah, I can stop in
I
and
can
see
stop
what they're
in
talking
and
about.
check and talk about what's happening. So I'm announcing that this is my next strategy for the next rural community that the students will be working with spring semester. I'll let you know if this works any better. But this is very serious in the sense of it's very important to engage these people. They know it's important, so how can we facilitate it for them so that they feel that they can take the time and come out. Has your group, alone or in conjunction with some other groups, sponsored the showing of films such as An Inconvenient Truth or Who Killed the Electric Car? I'm not shilling for these movies, but they're so good in opening the conversation.
Yeah, we haven't with those two films you mentioned, although we did talk about doing An Inconvenient Truth, but it was here quite a while, as I recall, over the summer, and it was at both Boardman's and at one of the other, multiplex places in town. So I think there was a feeling that, people had ample opportunity to see it. Now, there is something actually that we would like to do this winter, which is an energy film festival. It's part of a National Sierra Club kind of event that you can express interest in it, and National Sierra Club will send you everything you need, whatever DVDs, and you can find a place to show them and make it into a big media thing, and it's apparently working quite well for other groups that are doing it. So I would like to try to do that. That's just something that we need to be planning in the next month or two. So yes, I think those are an excellent way to kind of combine activism with entertainment, with trying to get people out and not have it be solely about, to get back to what you were just saying, solely about the topic, but also an incentive for it being, entertaining up to a point. So.
Well, just a reminder to you and to our viewing audience, the 2007 Planning Institute will be the week of the 26th of February, so we could work together and maybe block some of this in as something that could be happening in the evening.
Okay.
In conjunction with either the pre-institute activities, which will happen on the 26th, 27th, and 28th of February, and then the actual institute is the 1st and 2nd of March. So there are some opportunities there of dovetailing a number of educational activities that are going on over at the university and pull them all together at the same time.
It sounds like a really good opportunity.
Definitely.
Some of the things that can be done.
Mhm.
Any other aspects of Cool Cities, like the timetable that you all have set out for yourselves to go to the various governmental entities within the, are you going to do the whole county, or are you just going to work first with Champaign and Urbana, or are you going to do Savoy and St. Joe? And
The current plan is that we'll probably start with Urbana, and then because we are encouraged that we'll be able to have good success with the city of Urbana in this effort, it'll help us learn a good process for getting it done and how we can be most effective in doing this. And then we would probably sequentially take it to the other cities, Champaign, Savoy, St. Joe, even Bloomington and Normal, other cities that are further out, if this does really get to be something that is, starting to generate some momentum within the group's geographic area.
have you thought of going to the university?
We
Yes.
did. We talked about the university. There is a cool campus initiative as well. And so we would probably work with some student groups
Yeah.
to address it at the university level. And there's also the county level. I mean, every governing entity has the ability to make decisions that affect how much energy they consume and how much gas they emit.
They can't, but I mentioned the university. I do serve on the environmental stewardship committee at the
Okay.
university, and we are formulating a university energy policy. So
Uh-huh.
again, it's a nice dovetailing of activities going on at a similar time,
Definitely.
overlaying. And a contact for that committee is Dave Wilcox. And he's in facility and services, so that, would be a nice place to start.
Mhm. It's good to know.
Thank you.
We are just in the very much beginning stages of this, so I think we do want to at least have a notion of when we do get ready to, we've talked to the people in Urbana and perhaps do campus next and have an idea of who to contact then.
Exactly, and it doesn't have to be large communities. It can be smaller rural communities.
Right.
They can change their footprint on the environment
Mhm.
as well. Just for everybody, there is another cool city concept in case people have heard that term before, and that means a city, quote unquote, that is cool to live in. Michigan, the state of
Right.
Michigan, the
Right.
governor in Michigan has pushed this quite extensively, and other states have
Mhm.
taken on this. So there's two concepts out there floating on using this same title. When we talk about some of these issues about the environment and the gases and sprawl, doesn't an environmental justice issue also come into play as to who is being affected and who has the funds to sort of have avoidance from being affected by some of these aspects?
Absolutely. And I didn't mention this earlier, but for 10 years I was on the Sierra Club's National Environmental Justice Committee, and I was chair of the committee for most of that time. So I'm familiar with a lot of the environmental justice implications of, environmental issues in general that the Sierra Club deals with. And, transportation is an enormous aspect of, or part of the planning issues that are affected by environmental justice concerns.
Before we get too deep in it, why don't you just kind of define how we're using the term environmental justice so our viewers.
All right. It's almost easier to start by flipping the term around and talking about environmental injustice,
All right,
which
do it
is
that way, yes.
the concept, which has been proven through or supported by many academic studies, that low-income and people of color communities bear disproportionate impacts of pollution, environmentally degrading land and water uses, and environmental impacts of decision makers where they have no input into the decisions that are being made. And so environmental justice then is the movement that came about to address that and promote community self-empowerment and the assertion of control over decisions that affect people's lives by the people who are affected most directly by those decisions. That's what I mean when I talk about environmental justice.
And one of the glaring examples is the placement of a landfill.
Very much so, or another, an incinerator or some big, ugly, polluting facility typically goes in the low-income or people of color neighborhood. And that has nothing to do with transition of the neighbor. It's not like the people came in after because that's where land was cheap. No, it's because those neighborhoods were targeted for those land use facilities. With transportation, it's interesting because the civil rights movement started with bus boycotts to a large extent, and transportation is still one of the major issues where people are divided by race and class. Who has access to transportation that gets them where they need to go the most reliably? It's generally not the low-income and people of color communities. It's suburban, affluent white people. And so there's still, 40 years after the Civil Rights Act, we're still trying to find ways to meet the civil rights needs of communities on the same issue that they were talking about 40, 50 years ago.
And on transportation, there's, and you'll probably talk about this, the other aspect that there's gender inequity in the design of transportation systems, that they're not designed for tripping. And the people who tend to do the tripping meaning taking the child to daycare and then
Short
picking up the
trips.
cleaning and the groceries and getting to
Right.
work and things like that, is gender specific to females. So.
But that's not the way the systems are set up.
No,
right?
that's not, the
Right.
systems are not designed for tripping. The systems are designed to go from A to B.
Right.
One trip rather than short.
Than multiple,
Short
right.
hops, and we know that very much in our own system here in Champaign-Urbana. You could not run errands very time efficient
Right.
by our mass transit. Yeah, I just wanted to add that to the other aspect of our transportation systems.
Oh, that's a very
They
good point.
collapse on several levels, yeah.
And in addition to that, one of the things that I've learned more recently is that the vast majority of the United States population lives in urban centers and urban suburban centers. And somewhere, the numbers vary, but somewhere between 30 and 50% of people living in those urban centers are transit dependent. And yet 20% or less of all the receipts from gas tax revenues goes to transit-related initiatives. It's always easier to build more highways or widen the roads that
Lay
are already
concrete.
there, right, than it is to think about designing efficient transportation systems. And there's one other sort of personal anecdote that I think it was very instructive to me back when I was first learning about environmental justice issues. I hosted a workshop for my Sierra Club chapter, which was the Minnesota chapter at the time, back in 1995, and invited a local environmental justice leader to come and talk. Her name is Annie Young, and she's still active in the city of Minneapolis and serves on the Environmental Justice Advocates of Minnesota Board of Directors. And she talked about racism through road building. And I found that to be a really intriguing term, and it's not, it has several manifestations. Where do the highways go? Well, they go right through the parts of town that people want to get through quickly. And those typically tend to be lower income neighborhoods. That's where the freeways go when you're trying to go get people from the suburbs to the inner city or the downtown areas for employment purposes. And at the same time, what happens is you destroy neighborhoods and you destroy communities. Because if the bulk of the residential population is over here, but the grocery store is over here, and the freeway goes in between the two, you've just disrupted people's lives in being able to simply go and buy groceries.
And in addition is that huge problem that also goes on, and that is industry moves out to the suburb, but the way the transportation is designed is to go into the center of town right at work time and out at the end of the work day. And these folks are trying to get out to their job. We had that out when Marketplace was beginning to develop and the mass transit wasn't servicing that area.
Okay.
And they did not negotiate with those businesses to get X amount from the development to go into the bus transportation financial pot so they could be serviced until such time that the critical mass existed out there, and the mass transit would naturally then begin to schedule buses to go out there. So we had jobs out on North Prospect, but we were not servicing that area, so these folks couldn't get out to their jobs.
It affects people's social and economic and physical mobility. If you can't get to where the jobs are, how are you going to improve your economic situation?
Exactly. Let's not skirt, though, some of the other issues that you were talking about, and that has to do with landfills, incinerators, some of the other issues that come under this umbrella title of environmental injustice or justice, whichever way you want to look at it.
Would it be all right for me to talk a little bit about the Sierra Club's environmental justice work specifically?
Absolutely.
Okay, that might give a perspective on the breadth of issues. So when the club made a commitment to working with environmental justice communities, we had to find a way that we could participate in the work effectively as not representative of the communities we were hoping to work with. Overwhelmingly upper middle class Sierra Club members. And so there are racial and cultural barriers that we needed to find a way to get across in order to have effective working relationships with these communities. The first thing that we decided to do was make a commitment that we would never be seen as trying to lead or speak for these communities on their struggles. Our place was to be a supporting partner, to provide the tools and the resources and help people develop the skills in community self-empowerment so that they could determine their own future. And we would support them on the environmental protection issues that they determined were important for their community. So it may be something that was related to a Sierra Club priority, but it may not be, and that didn't matter. Our resources were still going to promote the work that they wanted to do. And they would always be the ones being seen as the spokespeople for that issue. There would never be any effort for the Sierra Club to get media attention on an issue for the Sierra Club. We would always make sure that the people from the community were the ones speaking to the press and defining the issue on their terms. So over the years, we have been able to put grassroots organizers in, I think we're in 7 or 8 locations around the country now. And again, these are, they're Sierra Club employees, but they're doing the work to support these EJ communities. We have 2 organizers working in...
So these are people from the national organization?
National employees, right,
Okay.
right. And for example, we have 2 organizers working in Central Appalachia on mountaintop removal coal mining issues. Now, there's a direct link between energy use, transportation patterns, all of that growth and development all over the country, and how it impacts low-income white people in Central Appalachia, whose homes are being shattered by blasting, whose waterways are being destroyed because of infill, pushing the top of the mountain off into the valley and completely burying a stream. We have an organizer in Washington, D.C., working on open space access along the Anacostia River in low-income African-American communities. That's another planning issue.
And the Anacostia River is in Washington.
Washington, D.C.
D.C.
So that, again, that's planning. There is, particularly a few years ago, I don't know what the status is today, but there was a large chunk of open space that developers wanted access to for what ultimately would probably be gentrification, bringing in higher income housing, which generally ends up displacing the people who are already living there because they can't afford the houses that are being built or the townhomes that are being built. And the community wanted this as open space, parkland. And so the Sierra Club's role at that point was to support protecting that parcel of land as something that the entire community could have access to. In Memphis, Tennessee, we have an organizer who works to support a community that's trying to get emergency warning systems because their community is surrounded by 5, I believe, large petrochemical facilities. Mm-hmm. An accident or a release from any one of them could kill hundreds, if not thousands, of people. There are elementary schools located right next to some of these facilities. And in 2001, the Sierra Club adopted a policy on environmental justice. And I was able to talk to the board about, Sierra Club Board of Directors, about some of the things going on. And just the week before, one of these facilities had a major accident, and none of the warning systems that they had in place at the time worked. Nobody knew what had happened. And they'd been touting these, everybody's phone was going to ring and all of these things were going to happen, and nothing happened. So, the community's response has been, we need something reliable. So that also was an environmental justice issue. And we have an organizer working in New Orleans and Baton Rouge. Over the last year, his work has definitely focused on trying to help people put their lives back together after Katrina. Prior to that, it was dealing with the emissions from the enormous number of facilities that line what's called Cancer Alley in that stretch between the two cities. And public information, just knowing what these facilities are emitting, what you're breathing in, is critical for public health issues. And one of the problems now is a lot of this stuff is being withdrawn because of supposed national security concerns. And so again, people don't get access to the information they need. And right to know is a very, very big part of environmental justice concerns.
It is indeed. Peg, she's mentioned one major national policy. Are there any others that are of leading issues right now that the Sierra Club is focusing on?
Oh, I'd say the major policies, I think energy is right up there. Mm-hmm. We did a process last year that helped the National Sierra Club set its priorities, strategic planning for, the next decades of the Sierra Club. And group after group identified energy as the #1 concern, and so that's a big push for that. And we've, locally, we've always been interested in energy issues. We've had any number of presentations on ethanol. We had a energy forum last year, followed by a panel discussion a couple of months later, all sorts of local people talking about the different kinds of energy sources that were out there that we're all starting to hear about. So that would certainly be the other big priority that comes to mind. And of course, sprawl. There's been a sprawl campaign that I think has been reworked nationally somewhat. Mm-hmm. But these are all long-standing concerns, but I think what's topping everyone's agenda right now is energy.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm glad you brought that up because it brings back full circle to the local area. I meant to ask when we were talking about local issues if the Sierra Club, the local prayer group of the Sierra Club, is going to take any stance about the ethanol plant over our water supply.
Well, I think that we haven't taken a formal stance in the group, but I don't think I'd be going against anyone's opinion by saying that we share the concern that's out there about the amount of water usage.
The water draw.
Absolutely. It is a concern. I also observed the Champaign Plan Commission for the League of Women Voters, and I was there when the representatives from the firm that's interested in that site spoke about it, and they made sure to mention that they had a consultant, a groundwater consultant, look at the aquifer and seemed to put people's concerns to rest somewhat, but then after that went on to the city council. There was that letter that showed up in the paper
From the director of the
survey.
state water survey.
Yeah, and I think that made people much more concerned. Now, one could say that should have happened earlier in the process. I don't quite know where they go from here in terms of blocking it or anything. I honestly don't know. If the site has been approved and if the city council has given its approval, I don't know what recourse.
Well, they're
there
certainly
is.
talking about annexing the area.
Right, that's what the Plan Commission
Right.
was doing. They were annexing that
Mhm.
property so that it could be part of the city. And
But there's twofold issues. It's not only the contamination of our water supply, but it's the short life of the application of ethanol as an energy resource.
Mhm.
All the research shows that is not going to be, that's a very short term
right.
and then for the amount of investment that goes in to
Mhm.
create those plants,
Mhm.
setting aside the water issue, not to negate the importance of it,
Mhm.
but when we look at both of those,
Right.
those aspects of it. Well, I thank you very much for sharing what the Sierra Club is doing locally and nationally. And please again tell people how they can find information about the Sierra Club. Remind them about your website.
It can be found at illinois.sierraclub.org/prairie, or just Google Sierra Club Prairie Group, and that'll take you right there.
Thank you again, and remember, planning matters.